subtract out of their lives, and it's natural. And we're going to talk about this for just a couple of minutes as we lead into the message of developing a servant's heart. But I don't want anybody to think that, in any way I'm putting down New Year's resolutions. I think it's a great idea. See if you can help me guess. What do you think of the top? I found a list of the top 10 this year, and we're just going to go through the top 6 to save time. See if you can guess. What were the top 6 New Year's resolutions? Just yell them out. Yell them loud enough that I can hear them. Did somebody say waste? Waste more? Oh, lose weight. Oh, okay. Lose weight. Okay, we'll count that one. Brad, go ahead and throw up the number 1. The number 1 this year is tied in with what you guys said. It is eat healthier. Good job. Okay, what do you think the number 2 was? Uh-oh, somebody got it. The very first guess. Who said that? Hey, good job, Miss Kathy. Exercise more is number 2. Number 3. This might we might need a lot of guesses on this one. What is it? Are you looking at the computer screen? That's unbelievable. He's exactly right. It's save more or spend less, whichever way you want to look at it. Number 4. What was that? To pay doctor bills? Oh, spend time with family? Actually, that wasn't even in the top 10. It's hard to believe, though, isn't it? Guys, yell them out. It'll work a lot faster and funner if we're all participating. Work less? No. It was actually learn a new skill or learn a new hobby. Okay? Self-improvement. Number 5. These might be really hard because, 4 was hard, so it's not going to get any easier. Get a new job. That's excellent. It's not it. Hey. It is easier if Brad flashes it before we answer, isn't it? Number 5 is quit smoking. Number 6 is another self-improvement, is read more. Now I want to take a minute and look at this list. Don't take it away just yet. And it's good that we want to improve ourselves, isn't it? And just think of how it would help a community if everybody in a community decided at the same time. How it would help a church, or how it would help a family, or how it would help a nation. If everybody at the same time decided, hey, we're all going to improve ourselves individually, how that would improve ourselves corporately. But most of the things we choose to get better at tend to fall into a couple of categories. Either we want to help ourselves physically, or we want to help ourselves mentally, or we want to help ourselves financially. But just imagine the impact on the world if we all wanted to help ourselves spiritually. If we all, at this time of year, and I know these happen to us a lot of times when we take kids on mission trips. We see this as a natural time where you get out of the country and you can kind of step back and look at your life as your life is normally, because you realize everything about my schedule and my routine has changed. So this is what I like about my life. This is what I don't like about my life. And I'm going to challenge us today to take a look at our routines, to take a look at who we are. The things we do, the things we don't do, the attitudes we carry, the habits that we have, the hobbies that we invest ourselves in. And I'm going to challenge you to take a spiritual New Year's resolution to draw closer to Jesus Christ in 2020. And think of how that will affect your family, how that will affect this church body, how it will affect you at work, how it will affect this community, and how it will affect our nation and our world. Just think of the impact. So what spiritual discipline should we adopt? I'm going to challenge you with one today. See if you could guess now, what was the number 1 command that Jesus gave to his followers? He actually said it 37 times in the 4 Gospels. Now, if your mom or dad said something 2 or 3 times, doesn't that mean you should do it? Like I remember the rule at our house was the rule of 3. If we had to tell you 3 times, after the 3rd time, if it wasn't done, then there was punishment. So we might say, hey, you need to get in there and clean up your room. We'd notice an hour later it wasn't clean. Okay, you need to clean up your room. A 3rd time, hey, it's time to clean your room. If it wasn't cleaned after that, well, what if God has told us something 37 times? Do you think it's important? I don't know if it tells us more about him or more about us, that we're slow learners. 37 times. See if you can guess. What was his number one command? Okay, yeah, you would think it would be like love. Love others or love God. What else would you think? Okay, do not be afraid. You would think that would be it. Any others we want to throw out? You might think it might be like share with others, encourage others, help others. So many options. The number one command Jesus gave was follow me. Follow me. At the beginning of his ministry, those first 3 years, he often told his disciples, don't go and tell. Because we're going to talk about telling others here in a minute. But at the beginning of his ministry, because he knew they didn't know the message. They didn't know him. They didn't know his heart. So he would just say, come and spend time with me. Follow me. Then after they'd been with him for a while, then he would send them out and say, go and tell. But he would say, follow him. So if we were going to follow Jesus, what would Jesus do? What was Jesus all about? I want us to look at Matthew chapter 20. And if you've got your Bibles, we're going to be in Matthew first, and then in Luke, and then in John. If not, we are going to throw the verses up so you can read them if you didn't bring a text with you today. But would you read with me Matthew chapter 20, beginning at verse 25. Jesus called them together and said, now this is in this Passion Week, is what we call the Passion Week. The week before Jesus died was the Holy Week, the Passover week in Jerusalem, when Jesus spent every day of this week going and teaching the masses in the temple. Then he would pull the disciples apart in the evenings and teach them. He knew it was his last week to pour out everything he had to pour out. So in the midst of this, he sits down with his disciples and says, you know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So why did Jesus come? He gives us the two reasons in that last sentence. He came to give his life, and he came to serve. If you want to be like Jesus, you need to serve. If you want to be his child, you need to serve. If you want to be his disciple, you need to serve. If you want to live with him forever, you need to serve. We need to wash feet. We need to heal the sick. We need to give comfort to the hurting. We need to clothe the naked. We need to visit the prisoners. We need to feed the hungry. We need to set the captives free. The second command Jesus made, Jesus only asked us to do two things. And as you read through the New Testament, you see so many things he offers us. He offers us freedom and forgiveness, the fruit of the Spirit, love, patience, community, togetherness. He promises a home with him forever. He asks us to do two things. And one is to follow him. The second thing he asks us to do is to go and to tell others. We know at the end of Matthew, he records for us what we call the Great Commission. And we know it by heart, where he says, go into all the world and make disciples, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Acts records that, plus a little bit more, where he says not just what to do. He says, now go and tell. Go make disciples. Tell everybody. But in Acts, Luke tells us that Jesus gives us the formula. He says, go first to Jerusalem. Well, he says this in Jerusalem. So he says, don't forget your own city where you are. And he says, go to Judea. Judea is the area that they were in. And he says, and Samaria. Samaria was the area right beside them of the people they didn't like. People a little bit different skin color, different language, different background, different history, different religion. And he said, don't forget them. And then he says, go to the uttermost parts of the world. So we're supposed to follow him. We understand that one. We're supposed to tell. But there's the problem, is in the telling. Most of us don't know how to tell. Most of us have a great fear of this idea of telling someone about Jesus. Jerry Seinfeld says two biggest fears that a person has. Can you guess what the top two fears are? Stop it. You've heard this one. Yeah. The number two fear of all people is death. Can you imagine there's a fear that's even greater than the fear of death? The number one fear is public speaking. He goes on to say that at a funeral, people would rather be the guest of honor than delivering the eulogy. Thank you. But most of us have a fear of speaking to groups, to speaking to people. And so we're going to talk for just a minute about this idea of evangelism. We are told, follow me, go and tell. But how do we tell? What is our strategies? There's only about 2 that I see that are used in the world today. And the number 1 is what they call door-to-door evangelism. How many people have actually done door-to-door evangelism? Raise your hand. I was going to check it out. Actually, that's about exactly the national average. The national average is about 10% of Christians do door-to-door evangelism. About 10%. Of that 10%, they call it the 10-10-10 rule. Of the 10% of people who actually do door-to-door evangelism, if you knock on 10 doors, you will have a conversation with about 1 person. You know, most people aren't home, or most people don't want to answer the door when they see a stranger there, or if once they find out why you're there, they want to shoo you along as fast as possible. So only about 10% of the people are going to listen to what you have to say. And of those 10 who do listen, or those 10% that do listen, only about 10% of those will actually want to know more about Jesus or want to go to your church. So it's honestly, you have to knock on about 1,000 doors to get 1 person. It's not a very effective method, is it? If this is a command of Jesus, if this is what our Savior told us to do, we need better odds. The other way a lot of us do evangelism is we do what's called friendship evangelism. And the idea is that we're going to make friends with somebody. We're going to get to know somebody at work. We're going to get to know a neighbor. And then as we get to know them, when the time is right, we will tell them about Jesus. And the problem there is, too, it's too slow. How many have tried friendship evangelism before? A lot more percentage of us have. However, how effective has it been? It does work sometimes, but does Jesus want us to slowly spread the word? No, he wants us to tell fast. I've got an idea, and he's thrown up the graphic, Developing a Servant's Heart, that I want to challenge you with for about the next 15 minutes, that will solve both of the commands Jesus gives us, to follow him and to tell others. And we're going to do it through service. Through service. The first step is Jesus' model of serving. Matthew 13. Would you turn there with me, please? Did you ever notice whenever Jesus went to a town or met somebody for the first time, the first thing he always did was he served. The first thing he always did was he served. If he saw a blind person, he healed them. If he saw a wedding that didn't have enough wine, didn't have enough money to buy more, he gave them more wine. If he went to a funeral, he raised the dead. If he saw somebody that was demon-possessed, that was terrorizing a city, he cast out the demon. Jesus always first went and served. Did you ever wonder why? Why is his first contact always service? I think we're going to learn. And then he would sit down and he would teach. This is one of those moments where he's done a miracle. Now he sits down to teach. And he tells, in chapter 13, we're going to read verses 3 through 9. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. See, he's teaching the disciples here that the way we are to spread the good news of Jesus, the way we are to evangelize to the world, is the way a first century Palestinian farmer sows the seed. Now, the way they did back then is very different than the way we do today. You know, the way we do today, we use big machines to prepare the soil, and, you know, we have pesticides, and we have growth agents and other things that will help out, and they would lay them in nice, beautiful rows. You know how they planted seeds back then? You had your seed in a bushel, and then you would throw the seeds. You'd go out. It was best to do this on a windy day. Now, again, their terrain isn't level like we have here in Indiana. So imagine you are, you know, a mountainous area. It's very high. Places you couldn't reach, it wouldn't be safe to reach. So you know how you would do it? You would just take them, and you would throw the seeds. So that's why he says, so of course, some are going to get eaten. Some are going to fall in rocky or thorny soil. But those that land in good produce how much? 30, 60, or even 100 times. He says that's how we are to share the gospel. Tell everybody. You know, wait for a good windy day and just tell everybody. Everybody that can see you, everybody that's within earshot of you, everybody that knows you should know that you are a Christian. Too many times we don't share the gospel because we fear failure. Okay, should the farmer, if a seed gets eaten, should he quit farming? If one grows up in rocky soil and then dies, should he say, well, I'm going to quit? No, because sharing your faith is not about you. I know living in America in 2019 and a couple of days living in America in 2020, we're a very egocentric culture. Everything revolves around the self. But sharing the gospel is not about you. It's about him, and it's about them. He wants the gospel to be shared for the lost, for his incredible love of the lost. If they're rejecting the gospel, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting him. So what do? How do we share our faith? How do we use service to share our faith? And I'll just answer the question with a question. What do you do? What are you good at? Are you good at farming? Are you good at fixing computers? Are you good at cooking? Are you good at raking leaves? Are you good at mowing yards? Are you good at driving? Are you good at talking? Whatever you do it for Jesus. Random acts of kindness and love. And one key point, you can't receive any money, you can't receive any glory. I want to tell you a story. I was going to, whenever you write a sermon, you write it, and then a couple of days later you go back and you look at it to see if it's what you want to say. And I was going to use a couple of illustrations of times I've served people and how it was effective. And I didn't want to do that because I thought, okay, if I get any glory for it, then it wasn't for Jesus, was it? It was for me. But we share these acts of service and these acts of kindness simply because we love Jesus and simply because we want others to know him. But I am going to share one. Because he shared it first, and I asked his permission. He said it was okay. It was about 7-8 years ago. I was standing in Dominican Republic, and our mission trips that we do there for the sports camps have a very recurring theme. Well, we'll go into a town, we'll do 3 days of sports camps for them, and then on day 2 or day 3, we'll have a concert. And we'll bring in a Christian artist, sometimes a singer, sometimes a band, sometimes a rapper, and then we'll bring in a preacher. And we'll tell the kids, all 3 days they're coming to sports camps, hey, don't forget to come back here to this very basketball court tonight, 7 o'clock, there's going to be a concert, there's going to be preaching, and they show up. The people show up. This one time there were hundreds. Because it was interesting. The electricity went out that night, but we had a generator so we could run the sound. But then the electricity came on at the end of the service, and when they came on, the lights came on, and we saw how many people were there. It was like, wow. We had no idea. Well, on this night, one of our young boys who had just graduated from high school got up to give his testimony. He wanted to tell about his relationship with Jesus Christ. And as he was telling his story of who he was when he was younger and the stupid things that he did and the trouble he had gotten himself into. And then he mentioned one day that changed his life. And he said, my youth pastor, Dan Weaver, invited me to go to Sonic. And we had a conversation for about an hour sitting there drinking a milkshake at Sonic. And that conversation changed my life. And I was sitting in the audience and I was thinking, I don't even think I remember that. And then I was like, well, I kind of have a vague memory. I remember when he started coming as a freshman, he seemed troubled. I mean, he didn't seem right. And I remember I used to always like to go to Sonic, from 2 to 5, it's half price happy hour. So I thought, okay, maybe, oh man, I almost said his name. I didn't want to do that. But I remember just asking him, hey, well, how about one day when school's over, you come over to the church, we'll go to Sonic and grab a milkshake. I just have a vague memory. What we talked about is unclear to me. But it was a day that changed his life. And I've wondered how many random acts of kindness could we show if we did it on purpose, if we made an effort to love people into the kingdom of heaven, to serve them as Jesus served. Because I asked a question earlier, why did Jesus serve first? Because after you've served somebody, they want to know what you have to say. If people like you, they listen to you. And if they don't like you, they don't listen. So let's go serve as Jesus modeled. Let's serve. We need to move on. Jesus had a method, and it's found in Luke chapter 10. It was actually some of the verses Brother Aaron read earlier. But let's look at them again. Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 35. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down. Okay, hold on, I need to go back there. In reply to what? Jesus met a teacher of the law one day. And the teacher asked the best question that's ever been asked in the history of the world. If I had 1 minute with Jesus, this is the question that I would ask. And I bet if you had a minute with Jesus, it'd be the question you would ask too. The question that was asked, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? In other words, the way we would say it today is, what do I have to do to go to heaven? And Jesus said, well, you're an expert in the law. Tell me, what do you think? And the expert said, I think there's 2 main commandments. The first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And he said, and the second is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus said, you're exactly right. If you can do those 2 things, you get to go to heaven. And the man asked a question, well, who is my neighbor? So that's what Jesus answers that question, who's my neighbor, with this story. And then at the end, see if you can help me guess who the neighbor is. Okay, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And he put the man on his own donkey, took him to the inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said. When I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you have. Okay, who is the wounded man's neighbor? Was it the priest? No, it was the Levite. No, it was the Samaritan. Who is the Samaritan man's neighbor? The man who was wounded. We mentioned earlier, this difference between Samaritans and the Jews was very real at that time. They were people who lived in the same area, but they were taught by their elders to hate each other. Different skin tones, different history, different religion, different language. They lived together, but they certainly weren't together. I think Jesus is making a point as well. Who's the neighbor? The neighbor is anyone who has a need, even if they don't look like you, even if they don't act like you, even if they may be in a different political party than you. No matter what the difference, your neighbor, who should I love? Who should I serve? Whoever needs it. As we go through life, people, we've got to go through life with our eyes wide open. See the needs. I remember Jesus one time told his disciples, and they weren't near a field. He says, look out, the fields are white to the harvest. What's he saying? He's saying, open your eyes. There's 1,000 problems. There's 1,000 needs, and you have 1,000 solutions within you. Go and serve and love others. Great thing happens with Jesus in the upper room. He knows, now they don't know, the disciples don't know, but Jesus knows they've got about 2 hours left before he's going to be arrested. There's going to be this mock trial. He's going to be beaten, and then the next day he will give his life in a slow, sacrificial way for us. So he knows he's got about 2 hours. They go to the upper room, and the first part of this time together, they're going to have the Passover feast. So he's very limited on the time and things he has to say. It's the longest part, longest message of Jesus we have recorded in Scripture. It's John 13 to 17. And he goes over everything the disciples need to know before he is gone. Now, the time is precious. He's got a lot to say. He gets there, and you know the first thing he does? It says he takes off his outer garment. He wraps a towel around his waist. He fills a bucket full of water, and he does what? He washes 24 stinky feet. Why? Why? Simple answer, because they were dirty. They had traveled far to get to that upper room, and not one of them got down on their hands and feet. He didn't want to have this precious meal, this precious time together, smelling what was on the road between here and there. He washed the feet because they were dirty. His message after that is so precious. He says, now that I have done this, I want you to go and wash one another's feet. He says, no servant is greater than the master. If the master does it, then the servants do it as well. What is our command from Jesus? If we are disciples, if we are apostles of him, we've got to go and wash dirty feet. Raise your hand right now if you know someone in your life who is hurting. Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's loss. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's poverty. Maybe it's hunger. That's where you go and that's where you start. So what's his model? His model is love. Just as you go, love, serve. What's his method? Everyone. Doesn't matter who they are, what their background is. Love them into heaven. And then the last is his mandate, Jesus' mandate. Turn with me, if you would, to John chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. It says, it was almost time for the Jewish Passover. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market? I'm sure people are wondering, what in the world is this doing in a sermon on evangelism and on service? But I want to tell you a little bit first. The temple in Jerusalem was one of the Herod's temple was one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. We have no idea how they made it then because we couldn't build it today. It was the largest area of worship built to a monotheistic God in the history of the world. Okay, this thing was huge. Several football fields could have been contained within inside. But there was one area that was just for the high priest. They called that the Holy of Holies. Then there was one area that was just for the priests, where they could go and worship and sacrifice. There was an area just for the Levites outside of that. Outside of that, there was an area just for those who were born Jews who were still Jews. And outside of that, but still in the temple area, is called the temple courts. It was for people who were not born Jews, but had converted to Judaism. It was also a place that people who were not yet Jews could go and learn about God. They could worship him there. They could sing songs to him. They could hear the scriptures read and preached about. It was a place where visitors could come and learn about God. In this area, what are they doing? They're selling animals to be sacrificed. Now, if you traveled far, say if you came from Egypt or if you came from Mesopotamia to worship God in his house, would you have brought a sheep or a dove or a ram along or a bull along with you? Probably not. Pretty expensive. What would you do? You would think, well, I'll just get there and I'll buy one. They were selling animals there at unbelievable prices. And besides that, they said, you can't use the money you brought with you. You have to change it to, because they said, well, there's a picture on it. Back then, they put kings and queens and Caesars and emperors' pictures on coins. Well, you couldn't use that to buy stuff in the temple. So they would exchange it. And they'd say, oh, boy, today's exchange rate for Egyptian money, is terrible. It's just gone through the roof. You had to buy this special temple money and then pay high prices. Why would that make Jesus mad? Because what was that area for? That area was to try to convince people to come to God. And what were they doing to the people? They were driving them out. The behavior of the leaders of the church were driving people from wanting to be close to God by their behaviors. Is there a message for us today? Yeah, I think so. Jesus loves the lost. The greatest stories he ever told were in Luke 15, where he talks about a woman that had 10 coins, loses one and stops at nothing to find it. A shepherd had 100 sheep. He loses one. He stops at nothing to find it. A father has 2 sons. He stops at nothing to find him. And in every case, when the one that was lost is found, there is great rejoicing in heaven. What's the point? Jesus loves the lost. 2 Peter chapter 3, he says the reason Jesus hasn't come back yet is because he's waiting for one more soul, and that he will continue to wait one more day, one more hour, one more minute, so that those who are lost will come to him. And in Matthew chapter 25, the greatest story to me about what heaven will be like. They ask him in this Passion Week of teaching, he's in the temple, he's surrounded by the masses. They ask him, what will that be like the first day in heaven, that last day on earth? What will that day be like? Jesus said it'll be just like the way a shepherd walks through his herd and he puts the sheep on one side and the goats on the other. And he says, you guys get to go to heaven and be with me forever. You guys are cast from my sight forever. And both sides ask the same question. What did we do? Why am I on this side? And he says, well, because you fed me, you clothed me, you visited me, You sheltered me. You took care of me. And the other side, you did not do any of those things. And they'll say, when? And he'll say, as you did it to you remember the scripture? As you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. How you treat the person you love the least shows Jesus how much you love him the most. This isn't my words. This isn't some ivory tower theologian's words. Your salvation is dependent upon your service. You know, a tree by its fruit. God knows who's in control of you. Who's in control of you? Is it you yourself? Is it some other person, some idea, some desire? Or is it God? He knows by your service. By how you love others shows God he's in charge of you. We always come to the end of our services and we have a time called a time of decision. And sometimes people come forward to be baptized or to recommit their lives. Sometimes they come forward wanting a special prayer. But I'm going to ask at this time of decision, stay right where you're at in your seats, but I'm going to ask if you would take on this challenge of having a true servant's heart in 2020. Would you walk through life wide open, with your eyes wide open? Would you walk through life saying, I will serve anybody, anytime, anywhere, and I want no credit for it. I will do it because I love Jesus and because he tells me to do it, and I'll do it because I want others to know that there's a God who loves them. We need to show Christ and his love and his acceptance, his forgiveness, his dominance over our lives in a very practical and tangible way. We know it's what he wants, is that we share his love. He's loved us since we were in our mother's womb. And he purposely put you, and this is what I thank God for every day, why he chose to give me to a wonderful family who would love me and take care of me, to help me live in the greatest nation in the history of the world at the greatest time of their history. Why me? There's a purpose, there's a plan. God has his complete knowledge in heaven. He put you at this place at this time for a reason. And his plan for your life is that you would go and that you would serve. And as you would serve, you would share his gospel with a world that so desperately needs it. We need to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick, encourage the hurting, shelter those in need, visit those in prisons, support, teach, and lead them to the cross. Would you stand as we sing?